just need to click merge so that it goes to this wider one. Let me actually start the recording too. Merge, and then we would just need to pause the. Just check the. Hello, everyone. How's everyone doing? Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone, for coming. We are incredibly honored to have our comrades from Honolulu, Hawaii, joining us today, Kawenaʻulaokalā and Leimaile. We actually heard that our comrades were coming here to New York for the People's Summit for Korea. And we couldn't pass up this opportunity to have a teach-in and learn more about why the struggle for Hawaiian independence is crucial for anyone who is fighting for justice here in New York City, here in US. And it's critically important now because we're seeing the US pivot to Asia. We know that the US is striving towards a global war with China and positioning its military assets in Hawaii, in Korea, in Japan, all across the Pacific. And we need to be critically aware of what's happening and be in solidarity with the organizers, the activists, anyone who is fighting for the independence of Hawaii. So I'm so thankful that you all have joined. This is also being live streamed on YouTube. So if anyone wants to go back and listen to this talk, want to share it with other people, other organizers who you know, please do share it out because it's really important and critically important that we know about this. So I'm going to just do a quick intro. I'm going to read it so that I don't miss anything. Kawenaʻa is the political education chair for Hui Aloha Aina. an anti-imperialist Hawaiian independence party originally founded in 1893 to oppose the illegal occupation of Hawaii by the United States. He has taken part in struggles including to shut down the military's Red Hill fuel storage facility and to protect Maunakea. He is also a union organizer committed to building working class power both in the workplace and beyond. Give it up for Kawenaʻulaokalā. Leimaile Barrett is a Native Hawaiian storyteller and community organizer dedicated to uplifting the voices of her, I'm going to, no, Hui? Lāhui. Yes, lāhui, Hawaiian Nation, grounded in ʻōlelo Hawaii's Hawaiian language and protocol. She supports movement building through strategic media and cultural advocacy, from documenting resistance in Maunakea and Kapūkakī to Red Hill to supporting everyday acts of aloha aina. She uses her lens and voice to mobilize community around her land, language, and liberation. Leimaile currently serves as a chair for both the Media Committee and the Hoʻokanaka subcommittee of the Hui Aloha Aina o Honolulu, bringing media strategy and deep cultural grounding to her work. So please give it up to our presenters and speakers for today.
I'm just going to ask you to click. Okay, can you click to the next one? You're just going to click to the next one, actually. We're not playing this one. Yeah, next. Maybe arrows? No. Maybe arrow to the next one? Okay, and then arrow to the next one. Ki o mai la ke a nue nue, a lava like mauna lua me ka haui ki. Kua mai ke ku kalahale kalama, ma mala kanuku o kou, hea mai o iolani. Pi'ia elena manu o ku, na mamo Hawaiʻi, o ke aloha aina ka ume maganeti, mea ume ka pu'uwai o ka lāhui. E olohani ka ino, ha'a ka lamaku o ke aloha aina, a ku ka laulama o Hawaiʻi Aloha kākou. Next.
Okay, aloha kākou. My ancestors come from Honolulu, Hawaii. I was born in Kailua and I'm from Pololo. My mountain is Olamana, my rain is Apuakea, my wind is Malanai, my water is Kawainui, and my sea is Kailua. My name is Kawenaʻulaokalā Kapahua. I'm the political education chair, like David said, of our party, and also a union organizer by trade.
Next, please. So in your hands, everyone should have gotten a handout with translations for some of the Hawaiian language that we're going to be using today, and they're in order of the presentation. O hilo Hawaiʻi waiheʻe mauia me kaimuki o ahu koʻu mau kupuna, o ki papa waipiʻo I ka mokupuni o ahu aku kākuhi hewa kuʻuone hanau, no hawau I kaimuki keia maula, a o mauna ala kuʻu mauna, o ka ua kani le hua kuʻu ua, I ka makani kili o opu, I ka waio waiheʻe, a o ka lailoa no koʻu kai. O wau I hono o Leimaile Barrett, he media chair committee, he media chair o, he cultural education chair o, no Hui Aloha Aina o Honolulu. and I am a digital media content strategist as my day job. Next, please. So, what words, images, or feelings usually come up when people think about Hawaii? And just yell it out, just say it out loud, like, you know, the typical. What do you think, or what do people usually think when they think about Hawaii? Just say. Huh? Kitsch. Oh, souvenirs. Hula, tiki, vacation, surfing, beaches. One more. Rainbows, yes. Wait, what? Poke, yes, we love poke. And we did have a rainbow earlier, so next, please. So when we think about, right, Hawaii, these are the words we think of. Occupation, right? The illegal military occupation by the United States. The next, colonization, the theft of our lands and suppression of our identity under settler rule. Revitalization, the revitalization, thankfully, of our Hawaiian language and culture, which is the only reason why I'm able to speak it today. We are able to speak it today. Demilitarization, the removal of US military presence and infrastructure from our ʻāina land. Decolonization, the process of dismantling colonial systems and mindsets. And 6, restoration, the full political and national restoration of our Hawaiian kingdom. Next. All right, so usually whenever there's a presentation about Hawaii, they always start with Captain Cook, as if that's when Hawaiian history started. We're not gonna do that today, right? So pre-European contact, we were abundant and self-sustaining. Hawaii had a thriving land and ocean-based economy with sustainable systems like taro terraces, right? Fish ponds and dry land farming that fed large populations across our islands. We had advanced governance where we had a structured, yes, it was chiefly system, that upheld law and order and resource management and had deep ancestral ties that ensured leadership accountability and balance. There's accountability and balance. And then we had advanced science and engineering. We mastered celestial navigation. Who's seen Moana? Yeah. We were able to navigate the seas by looking at the stars. We had aquacultural engineering, right? Those taro terraces. If people are familiar with rice paddies, it's kind of similar to that. And then ecological stewardship without Western tools. And yeah, we just had intimate and innovative knowledge when it came to land and sea. We also had a rich cultural life. We had a thriving oral tradition, right? We did not have a written tradition until it was introduced by Europeans. Everything was memorized, our history, our cosmology, our genealogies, through chants, songs, dances, what have you, which was all important to like collective memory. And then community care, super important. There was the value of lokahi, which means harmony. Forgot to put that on the list, my bad. And aloha and it ensured shared resources, right? We collectively worked and supported systems where there was no one left behind. There was no such thing as homelessness in Hawaii. There was no such thing as an unwanted child, right? In fact, like, people would go up to you and be like, can I teach your child everything I know? I need someone to teach and to take care of. That was the kind of way life was i Kawakahiko in Hawaii. And so yeah, care for like your elders, your family, your children was all like super important to Hawaiians. And there was of course a spiritual depth to us, where the land and like the elements were seen as like living things. We had a name for everything. We had a deity that was like for everything as well. Anything we saw in our land was a deity that you know? So there was just like this, there was always this exchange of energy. And they were all sacred, like, right? We had relationships with gods, ancestors, and places that guided our life. And then we had Pacific connections. While we, you know, you saw that map in the beginning, we're very isolated in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, but we had expansive ocean networks. We were connected to our brothers and sisters in Aotearoa, New Zealand, right? I Kahiki, Tahiti, in Samoa, right? So yeah, we just had a vast Pacific voyaging world grounded in exploration, cultural exchange, and mutual respect. So the next time someone starts their history with Captain Cook, be like, actually, I learned this. Thanks.
Oh, I have.
Oh, yeah.
Next, please. Okay, so after the Europeans arrive, Hawaii is established as a constitutional monarchy after we're unified, just around the time we meet Europeans, or more so they stumble upon our land. And basically we have our first constitution in 1840, and so all this context is important as to why the Hawaiian independence movement exists and like what we're up against today. So it was constitutional monarchy, our monarchs were elected as well. And so Hawaii existed as a sovereign nation at a time when imperialism and colonialism are like sweeping through the Pacific at this period. And so there's an immediate focus through the kingdom government of like a national development project of just basically seeing around the world that we're going to be basically outclassed if we don't try to catch up in some Western sense really quickly. And so there's an immediate focus on developing a modern social safety net, mandatory, one of the first mandatory and compulsory education systems on the entire planet. Universal healthcare was a thing that was developed very quickly there, as well as like centralization of debt and the development of a national economy that didn't exist prior to European contact, but in order to allow us to start kind of asserting what the Europeans would have thought of as like domestic sovereignty and control of our land, in order to just make it so they didn't see it as they could just come in and claim whatever, as they did with everywhere else, that there was going to be some resistance, organized resistance that they would meet otherwise. And so basically as capitalism develops in Hawaii, there's basically a mixing of European and Hawaiian style governance and creating like a very mixed, commingled style of government that obviously European monarchies kind of looked at and would recognize as similar and would know how to interact with, but made sense to our native people as to how to create change in their government and move in these ways. And I don't know of any European monarchy that would allow kings and queens to be elected. It's kind of probably a little bit different. But also in the background of this is that 95% of our population dies between European contact and when the Americans take over in 1893. So in about just under 100 years, like 900,000 Hawaiians die of like disease and various other forms of social death. And then also one of the other big things was that, as Leimaile mentioned, was that prior to European contact, we didn't have a written language. We were in completely oral tradition. And then once writing was introduced, within 30 years, we had universal literacy, which was higher than the US at that time. And I think it's actually higher than the US has currently, which is depressing about the US public education system and should be changed. Next, please. Oh.
So, we'll get back to Kawenaʻa. But I wanted to tell the story of lāhui, which ties into what he was kind of starting off with. Lāhui is, the translation is Sovereignty Restoration Day. And this is illustrated by Kolumaika. Shout out to Kolumaika, Emily States. She's my classmate from 2011. Yeah, so let's get into it. Next. It all started in 1842 when British consul and businessman Richard Charlton claimed rights to Hawaiian lands that were not his. Charlton complained to British naval captain Lord George Paulet that he was being treated unfairly. Paulet then wrote a letter to King Kamehameha III, Ekolu, demanding an immediate audience. Paulet got the king's response letter and was not satisfied, so he threatened to attack Honolulu. To prevent the attack, the king allowed Paulet to occupy Hawaii unlawfully. Paulet found and burned all high Hawaii. Word was sent to Britain of the great injustice, and Hawaii waited to see what they would do. Upon hearing of the injustice, Britain sent Admiral Richard Thomas to restore the Hawaiian kingdom to King Kamehameha Ekolu. The kingdom was restored, and on July 31st, I think 180 or 81 years ago now, this is an old cartoon, our high Hawaii was raised again. Hawaii rejoiced. King Kamehameha Ekolu declared the day of restoration a national holiday and coined the phrase "Ua mau ke ea o ka ʻāina I ka pono." So what is ea? Ea is multiple definitions. It is sovereignty, rule, independence, life, air, breath, respiration, breeze, spirit. To rise up, right? Raise, become erect, and to smell. So ua mau ke ea o ka ʻāina I ka pono, right? Aina is land. Pono is all that is good and right and justice. So ua mau ke ea o ka ʻāina I ka pono means the sovereignty of the land is perpetuated in righteousness.
So part of that national political development I was talking about earlier was, besides developing these like European styles of governance and stuff like that, was an immediate focus on securing independence as a national project. And like I said, we were watching European colonialism sweep through the Pacific. Leimaile mentioned earlier, we still had a lot of relationships with other Pacific nations like Tahiti, like Samoa. And so our monarchy was in touch with them via writing and stuff like that. And so we watched as the French swooped up Tahiti, as the Germans took up Samoa, as the Japanese swept through Micronesia. The Spanish already owned Guam and Saipan and the Marianas. And so basically watching all of our cousins fall one by one, there was a massive focus amongst the leadership class of the Hawaiian Kingdom of, okay, we need to figure out how to secure independence or we're going to end up next on this. And so basically what they did is they started a diplomatic corps and sent diplomats all over the world in order to try and basically secure independence from, or recognition of our independence from European and Western powers. And so by July of 1842, we had diplomats going to all over Europe and all over the US just in order to get meetings with presidents, kings, secretaries of state, foreign officials, in order to try and basically get them to recognize our government through, like I said, that making our government look somewhat European in order to just try and figure out how to meet them person to person. And so while that story Leimaile is telling is going on, people are already abroad trying to secure this, and they hear this, and so it really ingrains in the Hawaiian memory this importance of securing sovereignty and in securing independence, and hoping that we would be able to do it through diplomatic means. And at this time, journeying across the world is not an easy endeavor. Planes don't exist. It takes like 6 months to get anywhere. Hawaii is the most isolated population center on the planet. We're like 2,500 miles from any other piece of land anywhere. So it takes a while to get anywhere. But as part of that, like I mentioned, a lot of Hawaiians are dying from disease. A lot of these diplomats are going, if the Europeans are bringing disease to us, going to the homeland of disease is not going great for us either. So a lot of these diplomats get there, they get recognition, they get these meetings, and then they're coming home and they end up dying on the way home. And so they kind of develop into these like national martyrs of like people who are going abroad with no promise that they're coming back, but on this diplomatic mission to try and secure Hawaiian sovereignty and hope that, you know, these European powers, if we play their game the way they play it, will be able to kind of secure our independence through that. Next. The guy who was up here is Timoteo Halilio, but this is a map of every treaty and all the nations we had treaties and consulates with. Treaties are in blue and consulates are in green. And we're not a huge nation, so this is a lot of people to spread out all over the planet. But basically what this was is a strategy of entanglement. And it was looking at these European powers sweeping through the world, through Africa, through South America, through the Pacific, and just gobbling up nations trying to stand by themselves. And so basically the strategy was, if we can get everyone to recognize us and have some form of relations with us, it makes it really complicated for any one power to come in and just clean us out. Because then if they do, they're compromising the interests of another foreign power. So for example, the British, right, they came in and that one rogue captain occupied us for their landholders. Well, we have a lot of business dealings with the United States or with Chile or any of these other countries. And so if we're taken over by one country, suddenly everyone else is losing out. And so it was basically to kind of pit a lot of these countries against each other through, okay, well, everyone has relationships with us, so it's better for everyone if we stay independent rather than someone getting the entire pie, basically. And so this is the extent to which that strategy plays out. We end up setting up consulates, and thinking of an embassy, it takes a lot of work to run that in modern day. In some of these places, it was one Hawaiian just going out there to be like, okay, I guess I'm gonna hold it down in Prague for however long this takes, right? And so this is, again, this development of these national martyrs of people going abroad with no promise that they're ever gonna come home, but basically for the mission of securing Hawaiian independence for the homeland and for the people who still lived in Hawaii. Next. And then America decides to screw it up for everyone, as they do every time. In 1893, at the behest of some American sugar planters, which these guys, I don't know why that one role in society of owning a sugar plantation immediately converts you into just evil. Well, we know why. They want to make money. But they conspire with the U.S. Marines that are in Hawaii on a warship called the USS Boston. And basically they launch a coup to overthrow Queen Liliuokalani and the Hawaiian government, with the express purpose of seeking annexation from the United States. And so the reason this happens isn't just because of the military, geostrategic location of Hawaii, which is what they always front. It's also because the U.S., does everyone know what a tariff is? Everyone been hearing about those lately, right? This is a big deal now, right? So back then there was tariff-free. The Civil War had cleaned out the U.S. sugar industry. There was no way they were going to recover to start developing sugar enough to supply the U.S. domestic market. And so what they did is they started getting their sugar from us and from Cuba. And so Cuba, we kind of knows what happens to them in 1898. Well, 5 years before that, they get us. And so because there's that relationship of money making, sugar planting in Hawaii becomes very lucrative. And so prior to this, about 7 years prior, there's another coup by the sugar planting class, this capitalist class, that strips voting rights from anyone who's not white and Hawaiian. So at this time we have a lot of Japanese and Chinese people living in Hawaii, a lot of immigrants. All of them are stripped of voting rights. If you don't own property, you're stripped of voting rights. And it also strips power from the monarchy to be able to affect change, a new constitution, any of that stuff. And it puts a lot of the authority into the cabinet, which was made up of a lot of these sugar planters who had gotten themselves into positions of power. And so eventually, through a grassroots campaign of organizing, that coup constitution that they put in is defeated. And as a result of that, the sugar planters' next step is to go call the U.S. Marines to kind of come in and take over. And so that happens. And so that story of Laho'iho'i'ea, that sovereignty restoration day, is important here because Queen Liliuokalani basically thought, okay, this is very similar to what happened back then. It's rogue freaking landowners of this foreign nation finding support from their military. We should be able to solve this diplomatically the same way we did, at this point, 40 years or 50 years ago, right? So it's not that far in the past. Most of the people were still alive who were involved in that, and there was a hope that they could solve it diplomatically again to avoid being drawn into an open war with the United States. And again, the other part to think of in this context is 1893 is the lowest point of the Hawaiian population. I said we had 1 million people when we first met the Europeans. By this time, there's 40,000 of us, under 1,000. And so Queen Liliuokalani, besides worrying about the independence of the nation and stuff like that, is also if we get into a war, we may go extinct. There's just not enough of us to fight. And so basically she cedes power to the United States, not to the coup government, but to the United States, basically as a power play to try and say, I'm only going to deal with the US government in this problem. I don't care about these capitalists who are thinking they're bigger than they actually are. I'm going to talk directly to the United States. And so this coup government declares in 1894 that they're a republic now, and then they start formally trying to get annexed by the United States. And so the reason this is important, besides it being the thing that strips us of our independence, is that this sets the stage. This is the playbook that the U.S. takes all over the world. Because prior to this, they were trying to do soft power stuff in order to secure their economic domination in these various states, right? Not only in the Pacific, but also through Central and South America, all the banana republics that get set up and stuff like that. The U.S. basically trying to puppet governments there. After this, they realized that they just have an easier time just going in, doing regime change in this way of finding landowners there, economic interests that are that are under threat, and then going and taking them out. And this is, incredibly unpopular. This group of sugar planters has no popular support, but they have the armed forces of the United States at their back. Next, please. And of course, that doesn't go over lightly. So at first, Liliuokalani yields authority to the US under protest in hopes of negotiating a diplomatic solution. And so people, people are ready to rise up and fight immediately. I mean, the Hawaiian National, the Royal Guard and other people are volunteering to fight. And she says, no, we're gonna wait, we're gonna try to solve this. That doesn't happen. And so 2 years later, the loyalists stage a revolt to try and siege the capital and retake control. And it's not just Hawaiians, it's like a multinational coalition of people who lived in Hawaii. So obviously Native Hawaiians, but also Asian people who had their rights taken from this, so they were no longer allowed to vote. So Chinese, Japanese people, especially Chinese businessmen, helped supply the guns. There are a lot of Europeans who were considered like underclass of white, so like Greeks and Portuguese were another group of people who, Oh, and yes, who got involved in this revolt. And then in 1893, 2 months after the overthrow, Hui Aloha Aina, our party, is established as a grassroots organizing front to start trying to organize people in resistance against the occupation. And so part of that is that they start gathering signatures for what's called the Ku'e petitions. But basically, these are petitions against annexation, and then they would take these to Washington to kind of show Congress that there's no popular support for what you're doing here, and you're going to continue facing resistance if you try to go through and annexing us. And so remember how many Hawaiians I said were alive by this year? Does anyone remember the number? 40,000. 38,000 people signed these petitions. So I imagine the 2,000 is like babies who couldn't wrap their hands around the pen to sign it. But basically every Hawaiian alive today can trace their ancestors to someone on these petitions.
And the reason why there was so many babies, right, is that they weren't living past a certain age. First birthdays, I don't know if you guys have heard of first birthday luau's. The reason why that was so important to celebrate a first birthday is because our keiki, our children, were not making it to 1 year old.
Yeah. And so there's this attempt to stop annexation through this petition, through this armed revolt, and basically the only way under international law that another nation can annex another nation is a bilateral treaty. That petition defeats it in Congress, partly because there are some racist US senators who are like, there are too many Asians there, but that's fine, whatever. Critical support, I guess. But because of that, the US just passes a law. They call it a joint resolution, but the same way you would pass a law to like ban smoking inside of a building, they pass a law saying we own Hawaiʻi now, which is definitely not how that works, but obviously they don't really play by the right rules, even their own. And so from 1898 to the 1950s, the strategy kind of shifts. It starts being seen that, okay, the Americans aren't leaving. That we tried to revolt through armed struggle. Unfortunately got defeated there. We tried this grassroots method. We're running into issues there, again, partly because so many of us just keep dying and keep ending up impoverished and stuff like that. And so the pivot becomes trying to do it through legislative strategy. Because at the time, Hawaiians are still the majority in Hawaii. And so, okay, fine, you're gonna take us over, but under America, we had to vote. You can't outvote us because there's just not that many white people here at this time. And so there's a shift to try and secure Hawaiian civil rights through a legislative strategy and passing things through local control to try and undermine US federal law and US domination in our islands through at least being able to control land rights, through trying to control our social safety net that still somewhat existed, and these things. And eventually these things are eroded away by, of course, US hegemony in our islands and the intentional settlement of white Americans to try and push us out. There's like these really creepy ads that they start putting out calling for like good white teachers to show up and start kind of doing this indoctrination and like bring your family and settle, there's all this land. And then, well, it's an island, you run out of land pretty quick. Next, please. Okay, that's all context. Now we get to the fun stuff, modern day. So we are from the island of Oahu, and the military basically starts kind of building up in Hawaii around the time of World War I. 1898, there's a Spanish-American War. They take the Philippines, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and us. And basically this starts precipitating this really large buildup of the US military. And when they first take Hawaii, US President McKinley says that very explicitly, if we're going to get our piece of China, that's his literal words, our piece of China, we have to own the Hawaiian Islands in order to use them as a base. basically what this means is that every time the US goes to war, they take more of our land in order to fund those wars. So we're from the island of Oahu. On the back of like the sheet a lot of you were given is a map of the United States. If you have a pen with you, 22.2% of all of our land on this island is owned by the US military. So if you have your pen, just really quickly scribble in what you think that number is on the entire United States, and then we're gonna like just see how close you get. Take like 30 seconds.
A minute is good.
Oh. Okay, anyone have a good guess? Want to hold up your map? No shame. Ooh, circles. Okay, that's smart. I was way smarter. I was like trying to scribble it in and it took forever and I wasted all my ink. Okay.
I'm just gonna,
Oh,
just
perfect.
so you can see.
Okay, that's pretty, there's a lot of, man, you guys are better at math than me. I don't know what 22% looks like, and so my guess was really bad when I first did this. Oh, that's 22.2% of all land in the United States. So for us on the East Coast, from Maine all the way to, I think that's Georgia. My geography is terrible with America. Georgia, all the way to Illinois. There's a lot of people there, including a massive percentage of the United States population, and just that's the entire Eastern Seaboard. Like there's major populations. Chicago's in there, DC's in there, New York City's there. That's a lot of places. If you're not from here, there's the Midwest. It's also there's a lot of food production in that area. There's a lot of things that we can do with that. You know, I know people in America call it flyover country, but that's a lot of food that comes from that region. It's a lot of people. And then there's the West Coast, which is a little bit weirder, but if you want to cover California and Texas, those are two of the largest states in the United States, right? So think for a minute about what you can do with all of that land, right? There's a lot of things that happen in that land in the modern day. A lot of housing that's there, a lot of industry, a lot of food production. Just there's so many natural resources, how many national parks are in there, so much native land. All of that is occupied by the United States military in Hawaii. And so what that means is that all of that land is not able to feed our people, or on Oahu, but all of that land is not able to feed our people. It's not able to house our people. I know you guys have a housing crisis in New York. Imagine if they took up that much of New York, and then you tried to see how your housing crisis was going. You know, there's not enough land to develop industry that's that's controlled by people and stuff like that. We currently import 98% of our food because of this. There's just where are you going to grow anything? So this is the map of Oahu. All of that colored in, that's not green, that's how much land the military owns here. And so, and ocean, yeah. So like these little boxes is also water that's marked for them to do training stuff. And so basically, I'll run through real quick some of the key ones here. This big red area on the bottom, that's Pearl Harbor. That's the home of the US Pacific Fleet. This is a massive, massive, massive naval station that basically is the hub of their control in the Pacific. And the reason it's called Pearl Harbor is because it used to be home to these really beautiful pearl oysters that are dead. They're extinct. They don't exist anymore because the US just like dumped fuel into the water until they all died. It also used to produce a lot of fish, like hundreds of thousands of tons of food from that one region to feed the entire island. You couldn't pay me to eat a fish from there today. You develop like some form of super cancer. It's disgusting. This peninsula here is Kaneohe Marine Corps Base. This is kind of the area where I'm from. That whole peninsula used to be a really well-populated village. Everyone got evicted to build that Marine Corps base. And you're gonna hear this a couple more times in this presentation of eviction. This happens a lot to kind of make space for this. This region up here, this big, big, big red region, this kind of makes up some of the Army's control of Oahu. And what they do here is they train for jungle warfare. So anything they want to do in Asia or in the rest of the Pacific, that's where they go to train them. They also have a really bad habit of doing live fire training, like artillery training and rocket fire and bombings, and haven't really gotten it through their head yet that when you bomb dry brush, it catches fire. It's like they keep causing wildfires here. One day they'll go to 7th grade science class and learn that dry plus heat makes fire. I'm not great at science, but I'm pretty sure I know how to do that equation. And then so in addition to that, some of the other really important ones, this red area over here, is Makua, and we'll talk about that later. But these are some of the really huge military installations on just the island of Oahu, just the most populous island that we're from. And then that's all of Hawaii. And so this red in the ocean, that's all land, that's water that the US reserves for themselves to conduct live fire exercises. So they'll go out there and sink ships for practice. They'll go out and just shoot into the water, all that kind of stuff. So as you can see, a lot of land, mostly on Oahu, but there's some pretty big chunks everywhere else. And so as we're getting into this, keep in mind how much land here is occupied by this, because I'm not really familiar with the New York geography. Is there like a military? There's not a military base in New York City or like anywhere near it, right? That it used to be? Right. So with that much land, you can't look anywhere without seeing the military. If you look at the ocean, good chance you're going to see a warship go by. If you live where Leimaile lives, you're right under the path where like Blackhawks and Apaches fly over at 300 feet every day and shake your windows. Like there's nowhere you can look and not see them somewhere. Every freeway is dominated by military convoys moving between the bases and stuff like that. Most of the freeways were actually built just so the military would have a road to go back and forth on. And so this is, a very constant presence of this occupation. And it has a really big impact because it just means that like we're constantly reminded of the fact that they've taken all of this from us and a lot of us don't have anywhere else to go. Okay. So that leads us to where we are and why we're here, is that we can't let them win. And basically all of this occupation and all of these grievances against our people led to a mass outbreak of resistance in around the 60s and 70s with that rising of like the Third World and Global South and a lot of the radical politics of that day. And so our movement is really born out of two things: land struggles, primarily against military land that's taken from us, and anti-eviction. No matter if it's the military, no matter if it's some wealthy landowner, they really like kicking Hawaiians off their land and making us homeless and then building something else there. And so in the 60s and 70s, that's what kicks off our movement, is this, there's a seizing of an entire island to turn it into a military bombing range. This island's called Ko'olave. Actually, let me put that out. This is Ko'olave. That entire island becomes a bombing range, and they bomb it so hard that they bomb it so hard it breaks the island open, and it can't sustain life anymore because the aquifer spilled out into the ocean. It just can't sustain it. But our movement is a cultural and political movement, and it comes from, basically like Leimaile said, this conjoining of the people who were like, our culture is dying, and at some point in 1973, I think there was a survey done. There were 300 speakers of Hawaiian language left alive, and most of them were over the age of 75. So we went from like our culture being almost eradicated, being pushed off of our land, and of course the political movement of this memory of the invasion of our land, the taking of our government, and all of the other social ills that have come with that. Hawaiians now make up 20% of the population of Hawaii. We're 60% of the prison population, and they don't house Hawaiian prisoners in Hawaii. They send them off to a desert prison run by Civic in Arizona, where we make who knows what. All this kind of stuff, right? And so there's this it's fine, I don't need it. There's this combination of this political and cultural force. Oh, perfect. There's this combination of this political and cultural force to start kind of, one, we need to save our culture, otherwise we're going to lose it, and then it's gone. And then also that we can't have, the reason we're losing our culture is because we've lost all of this political stuff, the land, the governance, all of that would help us sustain it. And so those forces kind of come together. And so the big enemy that's been kind of the villain in our movement this whole time is the US military. The people at the beginning who took our land and continue to aggress against us today. And so part of the win against that has been, our movement is, I don't know who else in the US has been able to do this, but one of the benefits of our movement is that we've been able to kind of chart a path of how you can force the US military to concede, not just rhetorical victories, but concede land. We've run multiple campaigns where we've been able to force the military to not just give us up something, but to close entire facilities and just give them back to us because of the mass resistance that breaks out against them, which is great. So one of the big ones, thank you. So one of the big ones is Ko'olave, which, do you want to do the cultural explanation?
Sure. So Kawenaʻulaokalā literally translates to the taking away, as by currents. There is one current, or there's one path that you can kind of see called Keala i Kahiki, and it is said, right, that Hawaiians came from Kahiki or Tahiti, right? So Tahiti is like kind of like the parent to Hawaii in a way where Hawaii is kind of like the parent to New Zealand, Aotearoa, right? And so there's like a navigator's, I've been to Ko'olave a couple of times, and there's a navigator's chair up on the highest point of Ko'olave where you can see all the channels from that one place. So it was very significant in the ways of like teaching navigation. And then this island is also associated with the god Kanaloa, who is the god of the ocean. And it was also at one point called Kanaloa as well. So, yeah.
And so this island is kind of the launching point of the modern Hawaiian sovereignty movement for a couple reasons. One, this island is not, you saw the map, it's not that far off of Maui and other population islands that are inhabited currently. There used to be people on Ko'olave, they're not there anymore, after this especially. But basically, you can feel the bombing of Ko'olave on a bunch of the other islands. I mean, when it's like, the explosions is this big, the ground shakes, right? And also it being so significant in our culture and sacred meant that people were greatly offended by this, obviously, and wanted to find a way to stop it. And so in the 70s, basically a bunch of like 20-year-olds decided they were going to go occupy the island and then call the military on the radio and say, hey, we're here, stop bombing. I've been on some frontline actions, that's kind of intense. But they did it. They hid in caves on the island and then put out the radio, like leaked it to the military and to the press, hey, we're on the island, you have to stop bombing. And it led to, eventually, the mass outrage, the mass uprising and resistance, causing them all of this chaos of like them forcing the military to stop exercises and stop training to go and hunt these people down in caves and chase them all over the island. And eventually, it gets us the island back, but not before we lose two of our like brilliant leaders to martyrdom through trying to save this island. And then one of the other George Helm and Kimo Mitchell, yeah, two of our martyrs who died saving Ko'olave. And then one of the other really big, kind of more modern examples of us fighting the U.S. military on some of this land stuff is Kapūkakī,
which translates to the petulant trumpet shell. So if you've watched Moana, right, you've seen that shell that is, we call it a pū. It's what makes the sound. It's used in a lot of different like ceremony and announcing and all that kind of stuff. Kapūkakī is the original name of that place now called Red Hill, and it is located by Moanalua. It is a place, obviously, that that water comes from, right? The aquifer was right under Red Hill. I mean, he'll explain what happened, but it's very much, and water is very sacred, right, to Hawaii, but water is everything. Just as the rest of the world knows how important water was, Hawaii knows how important water is. Vai is literally in the word Hawaii, and like the word for like wealth is vai, right? So that's the kind of like importance that Hawaii had for vai, that even the word for wealth is vai, 2 times.
So in 2021, let me rewind. Around the time, remember how I said every time the U.S. goes to war, they take more land? So in 1945, Pearl Harbor gets bombed, right? And as a part of that, the U.S. decides, okay, well, a bunch of our stuff just got blown up by the Japanese. We need to find a way to build things in Hawaii where it won't get blown up. And so they build this massive, massive fuel storage facility that they call Red Hill. They build it underground. It can store like 258 million gallons of fuel. It's massive. And then you can't bomb it because it's too deep. The problem with that is that underneath all of our islands, remember I said we import 98% of our food? The one thing we don't import is our water, because lava rock is really great at filtering water. And so underneath all of our islands, there's what we call source aquifers. And so over decades, water rains and then trickles through the lava rock into these gigantic containers of water, essentially. And then we can drink from that. And it's clean because it's been filtered, all this stuff. Well, when you put 258 million gallons of jet fuel right above something, and eventually, like all things that humans build, something breaks, right? And then need to do maintenance on it. Unfortunately, if it's way underground, it's a lot harder. And so they dump about 200,000 gallons of jet fuel directly into our drinking water. And oil and water don't really mix. It mixes even worse with the human body. And so in 2021, this fuel spill happens. They don't tell anyone. But people start showing up to the hospital with chemical burns in the mouth, upset stomach, welts on the skin, all these symptoms that they can't explain, and then people start smelling the water.
And who are these people?
Yeah. And so 93,000 people end up poisoned from this, primarily on US military bases. So they end up poisoning a lot of their own soldiers through this and their own families and stuff like that. But the way aquifers work is like, imagine if you had a bowl of water and then you put like a cover on top of it and you shake it. The water is going to move back and forth, right? So water in aquifer moves back and forth, and so that fuel doesn't stay in one place. It poisons one well where you pull water out of it, and then it may drift like a current and get pulled up by another well, and so it becomes really hard to figure out whose water is about to get poisoned. But they spill all this water in. They spill not just jet fuel, but PFAS. Does anyone know what PFAS is? PFAS is this really, really, really toxic forever chemical that they use for fighting fires. It's a fire retardant. Like the cancer it causes, basically untreatable, like will kill you kind of stuff. They spilled a bunch of that into our water as well through this facility. And so for years, for decades, the Hawaiian movement was demanding the US military to shut this place down before 2021 when they had this spill, because we knew it was a threat. It had been leaking minor amounts every so often, and the military would always come back and say, it's not a big deal, and two, go find something else to do because you're literally never taking this away from us. It's a state-of-the-art facility. And then this happens. And the mass upsurge that happens in the streets to start fighting back on this results in the military immediately backpedaling. They're taking heat from not just in the streets, but from their own soldiers' families who their kids are poisoned by this, right? I mean, think of like the children that end up on these military bases now in the hospital, and like the parents are freaking out because the kid's throwing up, they have burns in their mouth for some reason, and no one can explain it until they start realizing their water can be lit on fire, right? And so through mass organizing, protesting, and taking the streets, in 2022, like 9 months into it, the US military retreats and say, okay, we're gonna shutter the facility, we're gonna rip everything out of the ground, we're gonna drain the tanks, and we'll put the fuel somewhere else. And so this was a facility that they used to fuel not just World War II, but Vietnam, every war in the Middle East. And because of not just the outrage of their own military personnel, but the organizing of the community to demand this, and of the fact that Oahu is not inhabitable unless we have water, right? There was an ability to shut this place down. A facility that the US military said would never go anywhere and was a huge, huge artery of war throughout our entire region. And so basically the reason I highlight these two is because they put forward a thing for all of us, and New York, you guys are kind of in the middle of the belly of the beast, that this empire can be defeated, right? We're not a huge place. There's like 1.5 million people in Hawaii. It's not a huge place. And yet, ordinary people who just drink water, like most of us do, unless I don't know what you drink otherwise, were able to shut down a behemoth of the US government and of the US military in the region. So that brings me to why we're here today. So I've talked a little bit about some of our struggles to shut down, to fight the US military and all this stuff. In 2029, 40,000 acres of that massive amount of land that you saw that's occupied by the US military, the leases come up for renewal. And the US military has kind of fumbled the ball here because they've set up their bureaucracy in a way where there's an ability for this to be contested. These leases are on 65-year leases, so this is the first time they've ever come up, and the military got them for $1 ever. So I hear you guys are kind of figuring out your housing crisis here and how to stabilize your rent. You might want to call the military. I think they have an idea on how you can stabilize the rent, because $1 sounds pretty good for 40,000 acres. Better than a studio in Bushwick, I think. But I don't even know where Bushwick is. I just saw it on a map. But these leases are coming up, and they offer us an opportunity, as not just in Hawaii, but across the entire planet, to fight US imperialism at one of its weakest points. Some of the facilities that are here are pillars of the US's ability to control not just the Pacific, but Asia, and their ability to launch raids and wars of aggression into Asia. And these leases are coming up, and obviously what they've been doing in Palestine, what they've been aiding and abetting, what they've been doing across the world has never been more unpopular. Popular support has never been with us in the way it is right now. And so this offers us a massive opportunity to hit at one of the weaknesses they've kind of allowed themselves into. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of these places. Leimaile is going to talk about the cultural importance of this place, and then I'm going to talk about the way it impacts all of us. Not just Hawaii because it's on our land, but all of the places that are impacted by what takes place here, whether it's logistically, whether it's training, whatever it is. So the one we're going to start with is Barking Sands, which is on the island of Kauai.
So Polihale, it is a house of night. It is a house of afterlife. It is a jumping point or a gateway to the ancestral realm. When the sun sets, it is said that whoever has passed that day jumps into the sunset from this place. And there's a place like this on every single island that our ancestors jump off of. Poli also, like if you break down the word poli and hale, poli is like bosom, and hale is house. And like poli is like kind of the importance of poli is like, right, like you carry a keiki here, you feed a keiki here, like whether you're, sorry, a keiki is a child, whether you're a male or a female or identify as something else, like this area is like meant to like hold and hug and carry. So it's kind of like, that kind of gives that kind of mana'o thought to it. And then it also sits upon Hawaiian cultural sites like heiau or temples and burials where our ancestors have been buried. And the reason why it's called Barking Sands is when the wind hits the sand a certain way, it sounds like it's barking.
Used to, past tense, because they built on it and now the sand doesn't move that way anymore. But Barking Sands is it's called the Barking Sands Pacific Missile Range Facility. It's the largest multi-domain missile base on the entire planet, not just in the Pacific. And so what that means is a multi-domain is basically they launch all kinds of missiles here. They can launch from silos, they can launch from trucks, they can launch from planes, and they can also launch from ships. And so they've done nuclear tests, launched from this place toward places like Christmas Island or the Marshall Islands and stuff like that. But this is the largest missile facility on the entire planet. Everything from the Iron Dome to David's Sling to the Arrow 3 interceptors that you see Israel use, to the THAAD system that is now in Korea and across and in Israel as well now, and also the Minuteman 3s, which are like U.S. intercontinental ballistic missiles. They're all tested here and they're all housed here. And so this is obviously very significant, but also it's the last major U.S. missile facility before the U.S. mainland. So in a war with China, this is their last line of defense before anything strikes California or anything else. And so what this makes Hawaii is a human shield. This is not some aura of protection that they put over, because as we've seen with Israel, it's really hard to beat missiles. What this does is make this place a target, right? Because it means that any power that wants to confront the United States or has to fight the United States, this is something they have to take out if they don't want to, one, get hit back, and two, if they want to be able to hit the U.S. mainland. So this is Barking Sands. Crucially important, up for lease renewal in 2029, and one of the places that the U.S. really wants to hold on to. Then there's Makua, which is on the island of Oahu.
So Makua means parent, elder, ancestor. Some stories state that this is the birthplace of humanity. As Kane means both man. Kane is also a god. So there's some stories that says that this is where the first man came from. We have many origin stories for all our other Hawaiians out there. And this is also seen as like the piko or navel of Oahu, yeah. All of our islands in one origin story are born from Papahana Moku, which is Earth Mother, and Wakea, Sky Father. And some other, like for Oahu is actually the child of Papahana Moku and someone, a god named Lua. So this is said to be the piko or the belly button. I forgot to say the English word. The belly button, navel, hello, of this island. And it's home to a lot of endemic and native Hawaiian species, which is a huge problem, as Kawena will, explain.
Yeah, so this is Makua Valley. It's a really large valley that I pointed out earlier on the west side of the island of Oahu. It was also seized by the U.S. military in World War II. They love doing that for some reason. But like Kaneohe Marine Corps Base and a lot of other places, this used to be a really thriving community. Like this whole valley, it's beautiful, and it's not small, as you can see, but it was populated by a thriving community. They had churches there, they had community centers, all this stuff. And in World War II, the U.S. comes after the bombing of Pearl Harbor and says, hey, we need your village for training. We need this valley for training. We're going to ask you all to leave for a bit, and then when you're done, you can come back. And then they painted bombing targets on people's houses and blew up the entire village. And most of the people who lived in that valley died homeless across the street at the beach, where they all ended up setting up camp and then watched their houses get destroyed. And so this is a point of massive pain for our people, because obviously it evicted an entire community, but also it holds this cultural significance for us. And one of the reasons this valley is really important is because the US has prepared for every war of aggression since World War II in this valley. Vietnam, any of the Middle East wars, Korea, all of it starts here. And what I mean by that is that all of the training they do, all the new weapons they test, it starts here. This whole valley now is littered with cluster bombs, white phosphorus, any kind of prohibited munition you can think of. It's sitting there in the ground because they don't know how to clean it up, because you're not supposed to use it in the first place. And there's been a long, prolonged campaign to try and get this valley back. We were able to get them to stop live fire bombing in 2003, which means they're not adding more bombs to the ground, but the ones there, they refuse to clean up. And so now we finally, through a long community struggle, have been able to get access to this land, as long as we're chaperoned by the US military, to one, make sure we don't do anything they don't want, and also we don't get blown up by the bombs they've left in the ground. They have a really bad habit of not cleaning up their toys. But this is an incredibly important area for us culturally and stuff like that. And the US military holds on to it today for two things. One, because I think one day they want to start bombing again. But two, as a bargaining chip. They know all of the other places we're talking about and how important they are and what they can still use. They can't bomb here anymore, but they know how important it is to us. And so they hold on to it and don't relinquish it, to hope in negotiating with us about getting the rest of these places back, they can just slide us this one for free and keep the others. And then this one's Pohakuloa.
So Pohakuloa literally translates to long stone. As you can see, it is a wide and open lava field. It is located at the base of Mauna Kea, and folks who might be familiar with it, in 2019, there was a standoff over the building of the 30-meter telescope on Mauna Kea, and Hawaiʻi, our lāhui, we were able to basically stop that from happening. This is also what we consider Vau'akua, right? The realm of the gods, because of its, kind of hard, it's hard to live up there. It's so cold and it's so hot. And so in Hawaii, we had Hoʻokanaka, which is where people lived, and then Vau'nahele, which is the forest, and then Vau'akua, which is where believed our gods resided. And another reason why it's important is because Mauna Kea, right, is where Earth Mother meets Sky Father. And so it is also seen as a center of Hawaiʻi Island. And it's also home to numerous endangered species as well, and burial grounds and cultural sites. Yes, even this lava field holds so much importance to Hawaii.
Yeah. So this is Pohakuloa. It's dead center in the middle of Big Island or Hawaii Island. I pointed that out. It was on this side of the map. And so this is the largest military training area in the entire Pacific. Ko'olave used to be that whole island they took and then bombed so hard it broke. This is what replaced it after they lost that land. And so what they use this for is everything from training aircraft to training bombing to training mixed combat. So it's armored tanks and stuff like that in infantry. And so this is the largest area in the entire region where they're able to do this. They also use a lot of prohibited munitions here. Does anyone know what depleted uranium is? It's this really awful military round that they usually use to destroy tanks. If you go to Iraq or anywhere in the Middle East where the US has fought, there are still babies being born with deformities because they leave this stuff around. And uranium's radioactive. It's not great for anyone, but especially not children. And so they develop wrong during pregnancy and they end up with massive deformities. They leave this, they use this on this mountain, and then they leave it there, and then when they bomb it again, it's in the dust now, and so it gets picked up and carried by the wind toward nearby communities, which all have much higher rates of cancer now because of this. And of course, again, white phosphorus, cluster bombs, all kinds of stuff. And so Pohakuloa plays a really big role for the rest of the world because this is where the Hall of Fame of human rights abusers train. Every 2 years, the US puts together the largest war games on the entire planet called RIMPAC, or the Rim of the Pacific War Game Exercises. And if you look at it, it's just like the Hall of Fame of people who have done crimes against humanity. Israel attends, France, the Philippines, any of the South American dictatorships that have all come and gone. They all come here and they do this. And again, remember I called it Rim of the Pacific? I didn't realize Israel apparently now extends to the Pacific somewhere. I don't know when that happened, but Don't tell them, it might go to their head. But they come here and they train on this land, and the US trains them on weapons and all this stuff. They try to sell them new weapons, and then they go back and they conduct it on their own populations or other populations that they decide they want to oppress and conduct war against. And so this is the only place in the Pacific where they can train to this scale. So the US trains for war against China here. They've trained for Vietnam, Korea, all of the other wars of aggression here. And then they also trained the rest of the world. And so one of the reasons this is really culturally significant to us as well is, like Leimaile said, there's a lot of burial grounds in this area. But the US has never allowed a cultural survey to be done. So we don't even know the extent of all the things they're destroying, because they just decided that this area is off limits and you can't come look. We're not destroying anything, we promise, but also don't go and check, right? And we know that there's burials here because we have all these stories of the lava caves and stuff that have been there. And all around the periphery, and I didn't bring it today because I'm pretty sure TSA would have gotten annoyed, but when we were up there in 2019, all around the periphery of this military facility, there's also temples and stuff. And in 2019, we went up there to do ceremony and stuff like that. And we found bullet casings in one of the temples, meaning that like the bullet casing is what comes out of the gun after it shoots the bullet, which means it wasn't the bullet they were shooting into the temple, they were in the temple shooting and like leaving rounds and stuff in there, right? So not only is, we know there's a lot of stuff that's being destroyed because all around it is this really important cultural area. The other political part of this that's really important for us is that this land was originally part of what's called Hawaiian homelands. So as pennies for basically taking all of our land, what they did in 1900 is the US said, okay, we'll give you some land that's set aside for you guys that you can homestead on and whatever. This was one of the lands that was originally to house our people. A horrible thing that happened, what is this year, 2025, 3 years ago, 2022, is now more Hawaiians live outside of Hawaii than inside of Hawaii because our people are being pushed into economic exile. We can't afford to live there, it's expensive. And so this was some of the land that was supposed to be to house our people. And I don't know about you, but I don't really know if I want to live on top of bombs. But they turned this land to house our people into a military facility. Again, denying our people the ability to even live in our own homeland. And so this one is really important because you take this away, the US has nowhere else on the planet they can go and train people for war, especially in Asia, where for combat that'll happen in the Pacific and against China and other things like that. Their options become really, really limited. And so these are just some of the really important installations that are up for contestation essentially in 2029. And their effects are wide-ranging. And so it's all part of what the US calls this island chain defense plan. And so like David talked about earlier, the US is gearing up in this new Cold War against China, right? They're agitating, they're saber rattling, they're doing all this stuff. And so what the US has done by trying to take so much territory, not just in Hawaii, but in all of the Pacific, is they've basically created these 3 walls of human shields that they have between them and China. So the first wall is Japan all the way down to the Philippines. The second chain is Guam all the way down toward West Papua and includes parts of Micronesia. And this third one is Hawaii all the way down to New Zealand. And so it connects US territories and US installations in basically this like triple wall against anything China would be able to do back. And it's part of the US weaponizing this region in order to launch imperialist raids all over the place. None of what the US does in Asia is possible without this. The war that Israel just enacted against Iran, the bombers on their way back landed in Guam. Some of them refueled in Hawaii. Anything that's going to go to Okinawa or to Japan or to Korea has to come through our region first, and a lot of times stops in Hawaii first. So being able to take some of these lands away, to shutter some of these facilities, and obviously all of it needs to go, but they've opened up a weakness for us with these 2029 leases just as like a way to start organizing through. Obviously, we have to fight to take them all back, but they've offered us this opportunity. And this is their last line of defense in the Pacific that they've left vulnerable. And so the reason this is important for everyone here, including on the other side of the planet in the East Coast, is that your money goes toward this, obviously. Many of you have family members that live in Asia or are from communities in Asia or throughout the Pacific or are from communities that are overrepresented in the military. This is basically their plan to just sacrifice an entire region to contain China and to deal with them. But this offers us an opportunity as well because they've left themselves vulnerable. Like we talked about, this tiny little archipelago, as you can see, you can barely see it on the map. This was the biggest I could get it. In this tiny archipelago in the middle of the Pacific, the biggest ocean on the planet, was able to shutter multiple US installations just by ourselves. with this current upcoming struggle with the campaign we're running against the 2029 leases, being able to do this, it's not gonna get Hawaii independent tomorrow, and it won't break the U.S. empire entirely, but it's going to do a lot of damage, and it'll shift the balance of power in this region against the United States. Without the logistics that come from this place, without the missile range, without the training facilities, they're not able to sustain the occupation of the Pacific like they have. And as we start picking this apart, it offers a lot of opportunities for other nations to start developing, to start rising up, and for the money that has been wasted building up this military fortress in Hawaii to start being put back into things that matter, like healthcare, like housing, like education, right? And so this is a struggle not just for Hawaiians, because we'll benefit from having our land taken and stuff or we'll benefit from not having our land taken, but we'll also benefit from being able to honor and help the people of the world who have been under U.S. occupation and hurt through our homeland. Every bomb that falls on Hawaii means another bomb is going to fall on Palestine, or fall on the Philippines, or fall in Iraq, or Afghanistan, or the Middle East, or on Iran, right? This is an opportunity to take some of that away from them.
So to just wrap it up, right? USA out of the Pohakuloa, USA out of Makua, USA out of Polihale, USA out of Hawaii, USA out of the Pacific, USA out now.
So I think we had Q&A that we wanted to get done. So if you have questions, sorry, I saw your hand over there earlier, brother. I was like, let me get through this because I'm going to forget things. I don't write shit down, and so I'm just going to forget. But anyway, I think we're doing Q&A.
I'll give you the mic here.
Oh no, he was first. Sorry, and then yeah.
America protects Hawaii in certain ways. If the demilitarization of Hawaii happens, how would Hawaii itself protect itself from future imperialism from other nations that are willing to do it, such as Japanese and their remilitarization recently in the past couple of 20 years?
Do we want to answer all of them, like try to take a couple
yeah.
and go, or do we want to do
Let's
one
take
at
a
a time?
few.
Yeah, okay. Remember yours.
We'll take a few questions and then we'll answer.
As you pointed out early on, Hawaii was decimated by its contact population. What percentage of the population is of Hawaiian extraction? And how does Hawaii get along with the other people that live there? Obviously, you're all suffering from the presence of the U.S. military, and the ability of Hawaii to become independent, take out the U.S. military depends in large part with an alliance between the people who live in Hawaii, have been Hawaiified, whatever you want to call it.
I'm not sure if this is a retread of his question, but in getting involved and trying to help and organizing, when an outsider traveling to Hawaii to try to get involved, basically when so much like food and water and shelter is being redirected towards tourism, and even the cheapest housing options like hostels, most of the time try to get out of selling to or employing people who already live there. Is it possible for an outsider to go over there and in some capacity not still in some way be taking resources and shelter away from people who already live there?
Yeah, so we'll take three at a time. You'll be able to do the rest of this, but I love this question. Well, not that I love this question, but this question kind of makes me laugh because people don't realize that Japan would have flown right over Hawaii if Pearl Harbor wasn't there. If the U.S. hadn't taken over Hawaii and hadn't taken over Pearl Harbor, Japanese would have flown right over Hawaii.
Yeah, so this question of like, what protection does the U.S. offer us? This is a question we get asked a lot in the movement, and I think part of the reason we ask it is because our frame of reference is how the U.S. has conducted itself in the world. And I think we would be making a mistake if we expected every other people on the planet to act in the way that imperialists have acted, right? So if the U.S. is kicked out of Hawaii, a lot of people immediately go, well, who else is going to take it? Who else is going to be able to? Because, as you saw, it's in the middle of the Pacific. If you look at China, they don't have a navy that's capable of projecting a lot of power outside of their region, right? They don't have, like the US has in terms of a lot of a naval invasion force, all these aircraft carriers and stuff. China doesn't have those kind of things. If you're looking at Japan, we know Japan's remilitarizing and stuff, but again, Japan doesn't have the military capability to launch these naval invasions, which is what it would take to take Hawaii outside of their region. They don't have a large military to conduct this. Besides this, like the logistics of it, there's also just the power balance in the world that if Hawaii is independent, no one else wants to see it taken because it gives someone else a massive competitive advantage over the rest of the world, which was, again, going back to that strategy of entanglement, right? The British didn't want the Americans to take it over because it gave the Americans control of the Pacific, because Pearl Harbor is the most effective deep water port in the entire region, and it meant that they would be, all of Australia and stuff wouldn't be as competitive for them. America didn't want British to take it for the same reason, the French, all this stuff. It benefits everyone, not just us. Obviously, we want to be independent. Also, we would like to be able to make our own decisions again. It would be great. But it also is beneficial to everyone else because it means no one is able to have this basically gun to the rest of the head of the region, right? All of those wars of aggression that we've all learned about the atrocities of, Vietnam, Korea, the Middle East, all of these things were possible because they had Hawaii. And not to say that they could have not figured out a way to do it, but it would have been a lot harder if they couldn't have a stopping over point in the middle of the Pacific, right? So in terms of what protects us if the US goes, it's the way the world has shifted, right? There's a lot more benefit to be gained if people want to have beneficial relations with us and stuff like that, rather than fighting what would be a bloody conflict to take it and mean that a lot of other global powers don't want to see another person gain the standing that the US does in the Pacific. So I think that kind of comes around to that one.
I'll answer a little bit of the second question on how we all kind of like get along in Hawaii.
The first one was how many of us are there left?
Oh.
Oh, okay. We make up 20% of the population of Hawaii right now. It was more, and then every year it gets less because more and more of us are forced out. So like more Hawaiian, like basically there's about 600,000 Hawaiians alive today, which means we're only like just now getting past the halfway point of what we used to be. Over 300,000 of them now live across the world, mostly in the United States, but all over the place. And then the other 48% live in Hawaii, and that's shrinking every day.
So because there were so many Hawaiians, right, dying, I think it was Kalakaua that really encouraged folks to ho'olu lāhui, right, to engage in relationships with other folks that are coming into Hawaii in the plantations, right? Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, Portuguese, all these different folks were coming from around the world to work in plantations. And so we very much like assimilated, or they assimilated with us. So like, it is rare to find a full-blooded Hawaiian. They're either Hawaiian Chinese, Portuguese, Hawaiian Chinese, Japanese, or Hawaiian Japanese, or Hawaiian Filipino, right? And so because and there's like something called Pidgin. I don't know if you guys have heard Pidgin before, but it's a Creole language in Hawaii, and that comes out of the plantation days. And so there is like this kind of this community, it's local culture, right? There's a local culture and there's a Hawaiian culture in Hawaii. And you still see that same kind of setup that was set up for the plantations in like our hotels today, right? The folks that are at the top are usually the, paler and
I think we can say white people, it's okay.
Yeah. White people, white passing, and then the folks that are in the kitchens, or who are housekeeping, they're the Filipinos, right? And then like Hawaiians, right? We're the drivers, or we're the bellmen, or we're the waitress and waiters, kind of thing. So we all have a similar history, right? We've all been oppressed in some way, and we've all really collectively like worked together. Even in the history that Kavena was talking about, right? Like during one of our when we had a rebellion against those that overthrew our queen, the arms that were supplied to us were from Chinese merchants, right? There's Chinese merchants supporting Native Hawaiian independence,
So what Leimaile was touching on around the hotels and this kind of racial hierarchy that still somewhat exists in Hawaii is that everyone in Hawaii, Hawaiian or not, is suffering under U.S. capitalism and, of course, U.S. imperialism. The reason there are Filipinos in Hawaii is because the U.S. went to the Philippines and slaughtered a ton of them. And now the biggest export of the entire country of the Philippines is Filipinos, right? I'm sure anyone who's been to the hospital, like you've probably been helped by a Filipino nurse. In Hawaii, same thing, as well as our hotels, right? The reason that people are cast out around the world is because of this. And so in Hawaii, we have this common interest of like, none of us are making it up that capitalism ladder any higher than we currently are, right? Hawaiians are getting forced down, Filipinos, Micronesians, everybody. There's a lot for all of us to be gained through liberation from this occupation because it means that our people are not subject to the kind of working conditions on minimum wage which we currently have, right? This massive rising cost of living that we're dealing with. Remember the 98% of our food being imported? That contributes to it massively. As well as Hawaii has one of the highest rates of, what is it called? Enlistmentship in the military because it's one of the only ways to get healthcare because of just the poverty that's kind of been enforced on people. No matter what community you go to, you find this, right? And so besides the fact that we're all so racially mixed, like I'm the entire plantation minus the Portuguese and the Puerto Ricans. I got everyone else, the Hawaiians, the Chinese, the Filipinos. But besides us, all of our communities being so intermingled, all of our interests actually really align, right? A lot of these people came to the United States if they're immigrants or, because they wanted a better life. They wanted to escape U.S. imperialism where they were, and they came to a place where it's still happening, right? And so by removing the U.S. element of this, it allows these people, many of whom are either undocumented or whatever, and some of these really suppressed communities that don't have access to education, that don't have access to healthcare, an ability to start building it for ourselves in a way that cares for us in Hawaii, in the place that they are all living, where we already had it before, around public, like well-resourced public education, around universal healthcare. These were things before the U.S. took us over that we had. Being able to start reinstituting these kind of things will serve the entire population, Hawaiian or not, in a way that better than the U.S. is currently doing.
We have a saying, we have a saying in Hawaii, or well, I say it. I don't know how many other people say it.
I think it's everybody.
But what's good for Hawaiians is good for everyone else. We know how to take care of our land. We know how to take care of our water. The family comes first. Health comes first. So it's not just Hawaiians that need those things. It's everyone.
Yeah.
Whether you're Hawaiian, white, Asian, anything, we're all people, and we all need the same basic needs met.
Is there a pan-ethnic political independence movement?
So, I mean, our movement isn't like the party we're a part of. We're the two in front of you, so we're both Hawaiian. But there are a lot of non-Hawaiians as a part of our party. But there's, like Leimaile said, what's good for Hawaiians is good for everyone. There's a lot of non-Hawaiians who are in the movement. Some of the most prominent people in the movement that I know and look up to and stuff like that, especially some of the people at the beginning, were Filipino and all these other ethnicities. When our movement started, that unity of the cultural and political movement and that anti-eviction struggle, a lot of those evictions weren't just taking place with Hawaiians. One of the big struggles that kind of launched it was the Kalama Valley anti-eviction struggle, which was this really rural valley that had a lot of farms and stuff. Most of the people in there weren't Hawaiian, but it became this focal point of the Hawaiian independence movement because it represented what was being done to Hawaii where all of us live, right? And so there's the doors never closed on people from getting involved in our movement. It's called the Hawaiian Independence Movement because that's what Hawaii's called. If it was something else, it would be called that too. But because all of our interests are aligned and because of the place where we live, we have to bring everyone together. And also because we're slowly being forced out and our population is still recovering from this induced genocide, essentially, this cultural genocide, we have to, unite as a unified, population there in order to make any sort of dent in the U.S. military.
In my introduction that David said earlier, right, he said the word lāhui. Lāhui means nation. And so when I say that I'm fighting for my lāhui, I'm fighting for my nation. And you don't need to be Hawaiian in order to be a part of the Hawaiian nation. So, right, we have a lot of different Filipino nationals and Chinese nationals. Folks, half of the people in Hui Aloha Aina might not be Hawaiian at this point, but they are they're Okinawan, they're Palestinian, they're Puerto Rican. We have, because they recognize Hawaii, right? They recognize our struggle as their struggle, and we recognize our struggle as their struggle. we're all in a struggle, right? Everyone else says, and we say it as well, we're not free until we are all free. And so we believe that in our movement, and they believe in us, and we believe in them, and we believe in everyone. Yeah.
Good job. That was great. Holy crap. Okay, the other one I had was how do foreigners help? So I think there's like two things here. When, for example, this presentation, we're talking about these leases and stuff like that. The struggle won't just be in Hawaii, right? The people who come to bomb these lands, most of them aren't from Hawaii. They're not necessarily launching from Hawaii either. When the U.S. launches the Rim of the Pacific Games every 2 years, those giant naval exercises that happen in Hawaii, they start in San Diego. They start on the U.S. continent, right? The weapons manufacturers that develop the weapons that bomb our land, none of them are headquartered in Hawaii. They're headquartered in New York. They're headquartered in D.C., right? There's a lot of opportunity for other people in other cities and other places around the United States especially to show up in solidarity and fight the battles that are in your community to stop the bleeding in ours, right? And so that's part of the pitch of not just this presentation, but this campaign too, is trying to build out this international solidarity in a way that we start pressuring them from multiple different angles. So it's not just concentrated on Hawaii, and we start to spread them a little bit more thin in this kind of stuff.
But your question, right, was how do you be a good tourist to Hawaii? And that's a question that we often get asked. There is, I believe, such thing as ecotourism these days, where like the best way to support the native people living there is to go and volunteer. There's lots of different nonprofit organizations, land-based organizations that are trying to restore our like taro terraces, right? Like our lo'ikalo. There's lots of places that are trying to restore our fish ponds. And so those are like some ways, and then also trying to just like support Native Hawaiian business owners so that they can stay in Hawaii. There's a lot of small Native Hawaiian business owners. It's kind of hard to find them. It's not all in one place. Hopefully someone will put a list all together one of these days so that it'd be easier. But yeah, I would say that like stay in hotels because that's where our Hawaiians are working. That's where our plantation folks, well, they're not in plantations anymore, but that's where all the minorities are working. They're not working at Airbnbs, right? Like they don't own the Airbnbs. It's people who live outside of Hawaii that own those houses and are making money off of Hawaii, and it's not going back into our economy. So tip your waiters, tip your waitresses. I tip my like valet person every single time when I get there and when I leave, because it's hard. They don't make that much money. We don't make that much money in Hawaii, so yeah.
Do we have other questions? Oh, I think the mic was.
We have some online questions.
Oh yeah, hit it.
All right, so we have a question here that says, could you talk more about the relationship between Zionism, fascism, and the Trump administration as it relates to U.S. military occupation in Hawaii, especially considering the leases ending in 2029? We also have a question, or if you could talk more about the ILWU in Hawaii.
Okay.
They specifically told me to ask you, Kawena, about this.
I feel like this person must know me somehow. That's
yeah,
weird.
I think so. And I think those were the main questions. Do you want to take another one from in person?
Sure.
Yeah, we'll take these 2 questions, please, and then we'll answer all 4. And whoever that was, I'm also going to talk about my work, so not just ILWU.
So my question is, you guys are part of a party, right?
Yeah.
So does your party get to like run in like local elections or for like, so there's any like, I guess, independent group that has at least some terrain in Hawaiian politics, like running for like a local municipal position or governorship? Like, I'm just thinking like, for example, in the case of like Puerto Rico, that, Hawaii and Puerto Rico are always like compared, even you have Bad Bunny that made a song, so yeah, but like, I think, in Puerto Rico's case, like they have like a independence party that they have like that runs, you know, in the elections. So I was just wondering if that's the same case for Hawaii.
We don't know each other, but we sat in the same. We have similar questions. So, since Hawaii and Puerto Rico have similarities, like he just mentioned, in its relationship with the U.S., I was wondering if Hawaii and Puerto Rico have united in the past in terms of fighting, you know, with the military bases. Like there still are live munitions in Vieques, and so I was wondering if, you know, uniting against the common situationship there, and just like yeah, just and there's other similarities. Like most Puerto Ricans live in the diaspora, just like you mentioned, most Hawaiians live in the diaspora. So I was wondering if there are coalitions that unite, and that was my question.
Perfect. Okay. Zionism, fascism in Hawaii. What are the connections? Well, both of them need to be sustained off of illegal occupations and imperialism. Israel doesn't exist unless there are the financial and military contributions of the United States to keep it going. And one of those contributions is also giving them the space to practice and train and do all of that stuff. The other thing that Hawaii does, unfortunately, for the rest of the world is a lot of weapons development. Everyone ever heard of Agent Orange? Yeah. That they did it in Puerto Rico. Yeah, they also tested it on us, and then it was developed in Hawaii. They developed it in our land, in labs on our land, and then they went and destroyed how much of Vietnam with it and stuff
My
like that.
grandfather was one of those people who worked on Agent Orange.
I didn't know that. That's crazy. But so Hawaii is a center for a lot of this kind of intersection, right? In terms of fascism and how Zionism and all of that intersect in Hawaii, because it doesn't exist, or none of those things can function or exist without imperialism, they need places to be able to launch this stuff. And Hawaii is basically their front line to do it, right? When the US launches their, like they just did, right, that bombing raid against Iran, where did those bombers run to after they were done? They didn't land anywhere in the Middle East where Iran could hit them back. They flew to the Pacific where they were out of range of Iranian missiles, right? When the US attacked Korea and attacked Vietnam, where did those troops funnel through? And then when they left those places, where did they go back to like heal, to like take them to the hospital and heal their wounded and stuff like that? They came to the Pacific. They came to Hawaii, right? In a similar way with Israel and stuff like that, right? When their troops are injured in Gaza and stuff like that, they take them either to, you know, they take them back to either the occupied 48 in Israel, or they take them to the United States. They also, you know, do a lot of their training for their troops in the United States or with other countries. So these things really intersect, right? These systems, unfortunately, it would be a lot easier to defeat them if these guys just didn't talk to each other, but they do, and they collaborate. And Hawaii is one of the main places where they collaborate, where they develop these weapons together, where they train on them, and where they sell them to each other. A lot of Trump just put out a thing, they're trying to put a bill through Congress where the US sells those 30,000 pounder bombs to Israel so that they can bomb Iranian nuclear facilities themselves next time. Hawaii is where they test them, where these things come into fruition, and then when they show them off during major military exercises, right? And so, we're going further back. And you know, that's kind of, those intersections kind of don't go away unless you start dealing with the pillars that uphold the problem. So if Hawaii is a place where these things can intersect and develop all of this stuff, taking that off the board of the United States, taking that out of their reign of control, it weakens both, right? If the IDF can't, not to say that if Hawaii gets free, suddenly Palestine's free, there's still work to be done there. But if Hawaii remains getting bombed and being used for military occupation, it means that the IDF is able to be better prepared to go and fight Palestinian resistance when they have intifadas, when they rise up, right? So taking that off the board means that we weaken the reach of US imperialism in supporting their little puppet government in the Middle East. Okay, what did I have after that? Oh, I don't know where this one came from. The ILWU is the International Longshore and Warehouse Union. I worked as an organizer for them, but they have a long history of uniting the plantation workers and the working class in Hawaii. It's the largest private union in Hawaii, but it has a long history of anti-war stances. One of the union really contributed toward taking down apartheid South Africa through and placing their own cargo embargo against, that was kind of rhyming, against South Africa. The union refused to move any cargo that was going to South Africa or on South African ships. Yeah, it has a, you know, we were talking earlier about this unity across, across the working class of this multi-ethnic working class in Hawaii in the hotels that started in the plantations when all of us were put into segregated camps on the plantations in order to keep us from unifying. Unionizing under one banner is what we were able to do to overthrow basically a fascist government that existed during the territory period. It was like 5 corporations that ran the entire Hawaiian Islands. Not to say it's any better now that the U.S. had made us a state, but it's just they just changed names. But it had a major effect in ensuring that there wasn't this racial segregation that existed. There was access to education, there was access to wages and stuff like that. One of the things the union fought for was the ability for people to buy their homes. People used to live on the plantations in company towns essentially, and they, like on the island of Lanai, if you got fired from the union, you had to leave because they owned everything, right? Or you got fired from the company rather, you had to leave. So winning the right to own their home and stuff like that. So I think that kind of covers the LW thing. And then you have this one? Oh yeah, go for it.
Just because, I just feel like I need to mention Kawenaʻulaokalā because it's part of the reason why I'm here too. We're actually both kind of here because of the standoff on Maunakea in 2019. That's where he and I met. That's where we met our chapter president for Hui Aloha Aina, Honolulu. And that's where I met my current bosses. So like, there's still the ripple effects of Maunakea that is felt through to today. I used to work for an organization called OEV-TV, which is a Hawaiian language, kind of like a station and a production company. I now work for this entity called Kawenaʻulaokalā. I'm on the media team that supports the Kawenaʻulaokalā network, which is a network of over 100 different Hawaiian language, over 100 different schools and organizations, all dedicated to Hawaiian language, Hawaiian culture, and land-based education. Right, anything between videography, photography, social media, graphics design, all that kind of stuff is kind of my spiel, I guess you could say. And yeah, I don't think either one of us would be here if it weren't for those mentors that we met on Maunakea. So just want to shout you guys out.
Yeah. And then the Puerto Rico questions. I'm going to kind of answer them combined because I think they're kind of related. So how have PR in Hawaii been unified, or like how have we interacted and what links are between us? Vieques and Ko'olave, same timeline. And so a lot of the people who are involved in the retaking of Ko'olave have visited Vieques and have been in part of that struggle for a long time. I mean, I can't remember the year, but there used to be really regular trips that Hawaiian organizers from the Protect Ko'olave Ohana, which was or groups associated with the campaign to stop the bombing of Ko'olave, went to Vieques and did these exchanges and stuff like that. So there's been a lot of that cross solidarity before, and I think still today. I mean, the Puerto Rican independence movement and we're fighting the same enemy. We have the same problem, and our histories might as well be like the same, just in Spanish and in Hawaiian, just in terms of like the plantation history and all of that stuff.
And 1898.
Oh yeah, that's the year everything went bad for all of us.
Yeah, Hawaii was annexed by the United States, and Puerto Rico was ceded by Spain to the U.S. Is that it? Yeah.
Yeah, and then this legislative question. Our party does not currently run in legislative campaign or like elected office stuff, and that's for a couple reasons. One, it's hard. The Democratic Party kind of dominates everything in Hawaii. Prior to statehood, everything was controlled by what was called the Big Five. There were these 5 corporations that owned literally everything in Hawaii, and they basically owned the Republican Party in Hawaii, and then through a bunch of like union and left socialist organizing in Hawaii, they were able to overthrow that, and then it got co-opted by the Democrats. But the Democratic Party kind of reigns supreme in Hawaii, to the point where like there are people who would be a Republican in any other state, but they have a D next to their name, and they use the color blue because it's the only way to get elected. And so that history is kind of hard to overcome at the moment, and it's kind of the way it runs at the moment, but also the fact that at least for our movement, there's a political choice to disengage entirely from the system where like none of this represents our interests, none of this gives us the change we need to see in Hawaii, and so we have to build it outside of their elected political game because it's always going to be controlled in a way by these bought and paid for Democratic politicians that we won't be able to get meaningful progress in a lot of these various things. And so I know that the Puerto Rican Independence Party has done a lot of work, and they've been wildly successful there, and they've done they've made a lot of incredible progress. For us, it was because they made us a state and stuff like that, and it started allowing not just people who like recently arrived to Hawaii and military personnel to vote and stuff like that. It started really tipping the scales out of our favor, and so it became kind of a political choice because territory or post-statehood, it meant that the U.S. could just dump more troops in Hawaii whenever they wanted, and suddenly we're outvoted, right? That's actually part of how they won the statehood vote, is that prior to World War II, they had a couple thousand troops there, and then after World War II, it was over 100,000. That's a pretty big voting block they suddenly have, you know? And so that's part of why this elected strategy is something that we haven't really explored. It may change in the future. That doesn't mean we're away from it forever. It's not like a dogmatic rejection. It's just, at this very moment, the grip that the Democratic Party has on Hawaii makes it really hard to do, and there's power to be built at a grassroots level fighting them and offering an alternative to the Democratic Party and a different way of political engagement than just showing up every 4 years and voting. That kind of takes place more on the streets, for us at least.
Okay, I think we have time for 2 more questions.
What are your thoughts about the Hawaiian flag? It has like the British flag in the corner. Is it a sense of like pride as well, or is it like is it an icon of like of the independence movement as well, or a symbol of the independence movement? What are your thoughts about it?
And we have a question on this side. Thank you.
What can the anti-imperialist movement here in the belly of the beast in the mainland do to support you guys? Because I think you did such a great job tying together, you know, the military connections that, you know, our tax dollars are also funding. And I actually lived in Hawaii for a little bit. I worked at a botanical garden, and I asked one of the uncles like about the state of the kind of, you know, Hawaiian liberation movement, and he said, everybody wants the same thing, but nobody can agree on how to get there. And I was like, I feel that a lot of you as an organizer here as well. So, you know, just wondering, you know, how you build that class unity in Hawaii and how we can make that global as well.
So we're actually really proud of our flag because it was Kamehameha Ekahi, our first king that unified the Hawaiian Islands, right? Which you guys will learn a little bit about when Chief of War comes out, because it talks all about that. But he was the one who chose Britain, right? And it was so that you know, our ships could, or like with ships with Hawaiians on them, could sail around the world, and ports would take pause when they saw the Union Jack, right? It was like, oh, this is, I mean, if you know that kind of history, there's like other cultures or places that have done the same, where they'll take like a portion of a different country's flag and incorporate it into their flag. And then the 8 stripes represent the 8 inhabited islands. So there is some like thought that was put behind it, like Hawaiian kind of thinking into it. Not to say that we won't like one day want to reimagine our flag. There's a couple of us that have talked about maybe what that might look like, but we're far from that, like very, very far from that. Everyone, our entire lāhui, our entire nation, we're so proud because there's so much history behind that flag. Just the number of times, right? Like lāhui hoʻia, it was taken down, it was burned, it's been a symbol of like our Hawaiian national movement for so long that although there might be a very tiny few that might want to change it, I don't see it changing anytime soon.
And then how can other people help? I think the global system of imperialism is just so interconnected that there are opportunities to fight it everywhere. A lot of the weapons that get used in Hawaii don't come from our islands. I mean, maybe they get developed in the labs, but we don't have the natural resources to put the factories to build them all, right? Those come from places like the factories in the Midwest, or they're developed at big defense firms that are headquartered in New York and stuff like that. There are opportunities, these kind of conjunctions of imperialism that exist all over the United States and all over the world, where people can fight them on their own terms. And I'll give a good example. RIMPAC, it's that massive military exercise I've been talking about. It's not just the US and Israel who take part in it, it's all these other countries, including countries like Indonesia and Colombia and Peru and all these other countries that have South Africa, all these countries that have condemned the Israeli genocide on Gaza. Every 2 years, they all get together with Israel and then they go practice this stuff. But there are friendly governments like in Colombia with Gustavo Petro and governments that have made whatever level of meaningful impact against this Israeli genocide. So that's an opportunity to pressure them. You condemned Israel for their stuff there. Stop collaborating them in their war games. Stop practice. Stop. Anytime Israel shows up, you should walk out the door, right? And so that kind of starts to fray and break this alliance that the U.S. is building and attempting to maintain, right? By starting to isolate them in Israel more. So that's something, not that if people are from Colombian communities or Indonesian communities or whatever, there's an opportunity there to really push back and start to break that apart. And then, of course, the belly of the beast, like every piece of capital and every piece of military funding flows through the United States. There are so many, individual impacts in every community that there's a chance to organize there and start the fight there to slow this machine and throw sand in the gears a little bit and start to break it up. The ships that come, for example, to Pearl Harbor and stuff, a lot of them come out of California naval bases. The RIMPAC games start there, all of this stuff. There's opportunities there to fight back against those bases or against the military presence there. So I can't answer how, let's say New York, because I'm not from here. I don't know all of the exact details of how each and every community can fight back, but I know for certain there's some way, somehow, that it's connected to these things. Especially for New York, just being the financial capital of the United States. And so because of that, I think part of the call to action that our movement, hopes to get out is also like this asking of different communities of figure out how you're connected to this, because I promise you that you are. Figure out how your tax dollars are going to this, or figure out how your people are being sent to do this or whatever, and help figure out how to stop it. Because unfortunately for us, as much fun as it would be to have all I can show you the whole map of every single little factory that contributes to this, I can't. But I know that people in their own communities know these things. And so it's really an ask for you to go back to your communities, tap into that knowledge that exists there, and figure out how you can start fighting back against this, whether it's in New York or the middle of Oklahoma or wherever the hell.
And on that note, we do have a QR code at the very end. If you folks want to learn more about Hui Aloha Aina, Honolulu, we have a link tree. We also have, if you guys had more questions, there's a Google form that you can add your question to, and we'll email you back with an answer. And yeah, our Instagram's on there, and I think, yeah, that's pretty much it. Mahalo nui, you guys.
Thank you so much, Kawena and Leimaile. I just want to make a quick plug. So Kawena is going to be speaking at the People's Summit for Korea. If you haven't gotten a ticket yet, I think tickets are sold out at this point. But you can catch the live stream on Breakthrough News. So you'll be able to hear Kawena and also organizers that are taking on this fight against imperialism in different fronts all across the world and in the US. So please tune in. Also, like Kawena said, this global system of imperialism is tied in so many different ways, and we can take action in every single way. And as folks have probably seen, the people of Gaza right now are going through immense famine because of Israel and because of the US. And there is a call for a global day of fast tomorrow. And then on Friday, there's going to be a day of action where actions are going to be happening all across the country. So please take action. Please elevate what's happening in Gaza and continue this fight against imperialism wherever you are. So thank you again for joining us, and thank you.